Good to have everybody with us tonight, and we hope that you've enjoyed your day, and I hope it's been a very pleasant one. We're in Acts chapter 10, and we got to verses 5 and 6 last week. And now send men to Joppa and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. He lodges with one Simon a tanner, whose house is by the seaside. He shall tell thee what thou oughtest to do. Now, we introduced a little bit of this last week, talking about Simon the tanner, but we'll continue with that idea. So here told to send to Joppa, and the centurion's soldiers and he sent a soldier with them, and he sent two of his servants. Why would he send a soldier with them? Was he afraid they're going to run off? Remember, back in those days, these were probably slaves. Although the word slave has a very bad connotation in our country, it shouldn't have, because you and I are slaves to Christ. It's the word doulos. It's found in the New Testament over and over, referring to us as Christians. Sometimes it does or is a bad thing because of the way people have been treated, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. And let me throw this out to you, just a quick thinking thing. Every one of you, if you work for somebody else, you are their doulos. Now, yes, in our country, you can say, I don't want to work for you anymore, and walk away, but then you don't get any more pay from the guy. You're a servant to that boss that you have. And as servants, we're supposed to act like Jesus wanted us to act. And what do we do toward that servant or toward that master? How do we act toward him? We respect him. We do our best that we can at work. As Christians, we're not going to be slackers. We're not going to look for a way to, oh, well, can I get out of doing a little bit of work here? And no, we're not going to act like that. We're going to give our employer, our master, a good day's work for an honest day's pay. And if they treat us badly, we're still going to treat them good. And by that, we can win converts to Christ. So the centurion was told to send men to Joppa and to call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. So the last glimpse of Peter that we had was that he had raised Tabitha from the dead. He was dwelling now in Simon's house. Now, this is really interesting because of what Simon does. Simon is a tanner. Now, notice the specific instructions that were given to Cornelius regarding Peter. He said, number one, he's at Joppa. He told him where the house was. It's the specific name of Simon, surname, or his the specifics of his name. He is Simon, surnamed as Peter. And then number three, he's lodging by the seaside, and he's in a man's house named Simon, who is a tanner. All of these specific instructions are given to him. And when you back up a little bit and you see Paul when he was converted, you see Ananias being sent to him with very specific instructions of how to find Saul of Tarsus. And so it's really interesting to watch what happens here. So this would speed up. They wouldn't have to go through the town saying, hey, have you seen anybody named Simon Peter? They wouldn't have to do that. They could speed up the process. They knew where to go. He's at the seaside. He's been in a man's house named Simon, and Simon's a tanner. That's where you'll find Peter. Now consider the word oughtest. It's a Greek word. It comes from the word dia, and it's translated must 58 times in the New Testament. Why it's not translated that here, I don't know. But it's translated 58 times with the word must. So he's given them specific instructions, and you must do it. You're compelled because an order has been given to you. Again, consider the work of this angel who went to Cornelius. Notice again that it was not to tell Cornelius what to do in order to be saved. It was to tell him, direct him to the one who would tell him what to do in order to be saved. And again, we back up We see Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, as he's on the road to Damascus, and the Lord appeared to him on that road, and he could have easily told him what to do to be saved, but he didn't do it. God never does for man what we can do for ourselves. So the angels, if we look at Hebrews chapter 1 and verses 13 through 14, we quickly see that angels are ministering servants. They are servants of the Most High God. It almost appears to me in my studies of this that there are very numerous numbers of them, and they're sitting around the throne waiting to be sent on some mission by God. I don't know that that's exactly right, but that's the picture I have. They're ready to go, and this angel is a ministering servant. And when we look at Hebrews 1, 13 and 14, we ask a question, well, who are they ministering servants to? And that text tells us, to them who shall be heirs of salvation. They minister to us in some way. I don't know how it's done, and neither do you. I do know that one of their ministers, or one of the ministers rather, I should say, of the Father, a servant, not really a servant, that's the wrong term. A colleague would be a better way to put it. On an equality with God, the Holy Spirit ministers to us through the written word. Does that make sense? Did I get that right? Did I make that sense?
I wouldn't use the word colleague.
No, well, I guess you're right on that. Let's see, what would I do? One who's on an equality. There you go. Who shall be heirs of salvation. Shall. That's future tense, isn't it? That indicates that these messengers, these angels, do something for people in the future. That's us. How? What? I don't know. And I'm not about to try and speculate on it. But I know the one messenger, or that we could call a messenger, the Spirit, deals with us through the written word. Well, to whom did the angel minister in Acts 10? He ministered to Cornelius, didn't he? He told Cornelius who would be saved. He would, Cornelius would, and he sent or told him exactly how to find the man who would teach him what he needed to do. And it really brings a question up. Are angels providing this same service today? And the answer is no. But maybe. How would they do it? It wouldn't be in the same way that it was done back then. How would they do it today? What about you and I as members of the Lord's church and our responsibility to look for, cultivate people to become Christians through providence? We come in contact with so many people over the days and weeks and months that we work, and people we meet in the community, and neighbors sometimes. And although nowadays neighbors don't usually come out of their house once they get home, and they hire somebody else to do the lawn work, and they rush in and do it real quick and out in their vehicle and gone. How would it be done? Through the people that you and I meet. That's God's providential work, working through us. Not that He directs me directly to do it. He doesn't do that. But He's given me the instructions, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He's told us to look for people, to cultivate contacts so that we can teach them the gospel, and hopefully they'll obey it. Look at verse 7 and 8. And when the angel which spake unto Cornelius was departed, he called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier of them that waited on him continually. And when he had declared all these things unto them, he sent them to Joppa. Notice one of the things we see about Cornelius, he's a man of action. And wouldn't we expect that when we understand the position that he held? He was a centurion. He was a person who, in the heat of battle, had to be able to give quick analysis of what was going on and then act and give orders quickly. Do this. Oh, and not only that, remember, he was also a member of the Italian band, an elite fighting force. There is said in one of the books that I've read with regard to this, that there was one centurion who would be over 100 other centurions. And Cornelius doesn't appear to be that man because of where he's stationed right now, but usually they were an elite band who protected the emperor. And so Cornelius, we see him first of all as a man, he didn't wait. He's like Abraham was. You remember when God told Abraham to take his son and go up to the mountain and sacrifice him to me? What did Abraham do? As soon as he got up the next day, he's gone. Well, this is the same way Cornelius is. It's the same way many military men are trained. Once the order's given, you act. And the angel had really given him an order. Here's what you do. If you want to be saved, Cornelius, you got to send men to Joppa. So he sets about immediately to obey God's command through this angel. And the first thing he does is call 2 of his household servants, a devout man and one that feared God with all his house. Isn't that what it said about Cornelius? He was a devout man. He was one who feared God with all his house. Now, remember, in those times, those who were household slaves, they were treated more like family than anything else. Even in America, it's interesting to go to old cemeteries. I love going to old cemeteries. You say, well, Bob, that's rather morbid, isn't it? No. I love reading the inscriptions on a lot of these tombstones. There's some really humorous ones and there's some really serious ones. But if you check and go through the history of America in the time when slaves were common in this country, many of them, when they were freed, did not want to leave their master because they treated them so well. And many of them took the names of their house or their master as part of their name. And so when we look at this word slave, we need to be careful how we view it. Because again, you and I are called doulos. That's the Greek word for slave. We belong to Christ. We are to be his slave, his servant. So then he called for a devout soldier. And the question would arise, as I briefly touched on it earlier, is, wait a minute. This is the same word devout, first of all, that is applied to Cornelius in verse 2. But why send this soldier with these 2 servants? Was he afraid they were going to run off and, gain their freedom that way? No, has nothing to do with that. It's their protection. To protect them. This was a bad world they lived in. We think it's bad in America now in places like New York City and Seattle and San Francisco and Los Angeles, where all of these riots are taking place. This is a little off the subject, but I love what the governor of Georgia did when those 6 people burned a police car and threw rocks through windows in Atlanta about a week ago. They are been charged with domestic terrorist. That'll put a stop to that nonsense. This was an evil world they lived in. In traveling, they were always subject to somebody robbing them. Maybe like the Samaritan, remember when Jesus talked about who your neighbor is, and he said, the Levite, the priest went on by, then the Levite went on by, and then the Samaritan helped this poor man. You could end up like that in those times. This was sent for protection. I don't believe it was to keep them from running away, because look at the terminology that's used with regard to Cornelius. He was a devout man. He had convinced his whole house to think about God. It's doubtful, because of his love for them as a protector. They were his responsibility. They were valuable people to him. He loved them. Now, notice something that Cornelius did. He told them everything that had happened. Happened what? In the angel appearing to him at the 9th hour and telling him all this information, telling him what to do. So he repeats it. And he gives them these specific instructions that were given to him: where to go, whom to ask for, what message to give this man. Consider what many would have done and how many would be insulted if it was even implied that they were lost. How many people have you run into and you have to tell them how to be saved, William, and you tell them, and then they look at you and get all angry. You mean I'm lost? I've had that happen. Jenny's had it happen. I know you've probably had it happen. Catrice. What? You mean I'm lost? You start talking to a denominational person today in our world, and you tell them, here's what God says to be saved, and they've been told something else. A lot of times you're going to get exactly the same reaction. They're going to be insulted. You're saying I'm lost? Not Cornelius. What does that say about Cornelius? Not only was he a devout man, but he was an honest man. He was an honest man. And on the morrow, as they went on their journey and drew nigh unto the city, Peter went up upon the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Okay, he gives the instructions to these servants. They take off, and the indication is they immediately left. Now, I'm sure they would have had to gather a few things together, but they left as quickly as they could. And the next day, the servants drew near Joppa. They would have had to travel most of the night to get to Joppa from Caesarea. Isn't that interesting? So intent were they, and so attuned to their master, that they were willing to travel most of the night to get to this city. That's what it would have taken to get to Joppa. About a 30-mile journey. An average trip in those days by foot is about 20 miles. That was considered a good journey for a day. What was Peter doing? Well, he's up on the housetop and he's praying. When we look at this word praying, I can just see Peter thinking about his obligations to God, how good God has been to him. I can see him praying for brethren everywhere, just like Paul did. Can't you? Now, we don't know exactly what his prayer was. We're not told. But he was praying. And what was God doing? God's preparing Peter for these unclean Gentiles. How's he doing that? Well, we'll notice in a moment he's going to let down a sheet with clean and unclean animals in it, and he's going to tell him to eat. So when was Peter praying? It says about the 3rd hour, and that's about noon as we would think of it. So the Jews had regular times of prayer. This had been set up a long time before this. And Peter had been a faithful Jew, and he carried over the practice. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, we might ask, do you and I have set times to talk to our Father? And maybe we need to. It's a good thing to plan, to pray to God, to give Him our gratitude, to exalt Him as the most holy one, to thank Him for the blessings that He's given to us. Recently in my prayer life, and I'm sure Jenny has noticed it, I've started giving thanks for little things that you wouldn't normally think about. The other day, I think it was the other day, that I prayed for our cats. I was thankful to God for our cats, especially for mine, because mine is more of a comfort cat, like a trained dog for PTSD. She comforts me. She knows when I'm having a difficult time with that, and she'll come and get on my lap and she'll purr and I'll pet her. It's a good thing to pray for things that we don't normally think about praying for. But we must not let it simply be routine without meaning. It's wonderful to set aside, if that's what we choose to do, certain times of the day that we're going to go to God in prayer. But don't let it become a routine. Don't let Sunday worship become a routine. That, the prayer's being prayed, or we're being led in prayer by someone, and we just kind of let our mind drift a little bit. Don't let it be routine. It's not routine. We partake of the Lord's Supper every Sunday. Well, one of the denominational excuses for not taking the Lord's Supper every Sunday is, it gets to be routine and it gets to be old and it's. No, don't let it do that. Don't let it be that way. Concentrate on what the man at the table has said about what we're about to do. Concentrate on the prayer that is being issued. Make it your own. And when you partake of that bread, I would suggest it wouldn't be a bad idea to draw in your own mind a picture of Golgotha with Jesus hanging on the cross, when that blood being shed as the nails had been driven into his hands, and every time he had to move to try and get a breath, as his lungs were slowly filling up with the liquids from his body, drowning in his own liquids. And every time he tried to lift up, those nails are going to be pulling at him. Those thorns on the crown on his head are going to be poking as they bump against the back of that cross. His feet. May not be a whole lot of blood coming out each time, but it's coming out. And I would suggest that when the Lord's Supper is being partaken of, that we really concentrate. Don't let it become something that's a routine. In verse 10, and he became very hungry. Who? Peter. And would have eaten. But while they made ready, while they were preparing his food, he fell into a trance. Now, notice, Peter wasn't hungry. He was very hungry. He wasn't just a little hungry. He's a lot hungry. We don't know when the last time that he'd eaten. We don't know what the circumstances were. Maybe he'd been involved in some very hard activity of work. And so now he's ready to rest and he wants some food. You ever been like that? Very hungry. Hungering further, intensely hungry is the Greek word. Often translated very hungry. Now, while they made ready, the text says he fell into a trance. Oh, what's a trance? Well, I think one of the easiest ways to describe a trance would be it's like a dream, but you're awake. You ever had a dream that was so real to you that you wake up and you thought you were really in trouble, some wild animal's chasing you or some car is about to hit you or whatever it is? Well, a trance was a dream, or like a dream, only you're wide awake. He's seeing something. God is in some way projecting to him this vision, a trance. In Numbers 24, verses 4 and 16, we have some information for us. He says, he hath said, which heard the words of God, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance. Now notice, He saw a vision that was given by Almighty God, and when he saw this vision, he fell into a trance, but having his eyes open. In verse 16 it says, "And he has said, which heard the words of God and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open." He repeats it. He emphasizes this is what a trance was. A vision is being shown to someone by God, and when that vision starts, they fall into a trance. So the trance came when they were wide awake, and God had a message that he wanted Peter to see and hear. Was this how Paul maybe learned as Saul of Tarsus what he needed to know and what he needed to see in order to be the witness that an apostle was of Jesus Christ? Look at verse 11 and 12. "And he saw heaven open." Here goes this vision, and he goes into a trance. "And a certain vessel descended unto him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the four corners and let down to the earth." Look at the detail we're given. "Wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts," and watch it, "and creeping things, and fowls of the air." All sorts. And involved in this, he specifically says, creeping things. Why? You see, this is dealing with restrictions in order for a child of God who lived according to the law of Moses, in order for him to be ceremonially clean. There were certain animals and all creeping things of which they could not eat. So when you see the creeping things in this text, you're seeing an explanation of all manner of beast, four-footed beast. "The carcasses of every beast which divideth the hoof, and is not cloven-footed, nor cheweth the cud, are unclean unto you. Every one that toucheth them shall be unclean. And whatsoever goeth upon his paws, among all manner of beasts, that go on all four, those are unclean unto you. Whoso toucheth their carcass shall be unclean until the even. And he that beareth the carcass of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the even. They are unclean unto you." This is God's command when he delivered to Moses, who then later in the book of Leviticus delivered them to the priest and the people. These animals, these kinds of animals, are unclean to you. Watch what he goes on. "These also shall be unclean unto you among the creeping things that creepeth upon the earth, the weasel and the mouse and the tortoise upon his kind, and the ferret and the chameleon and the lizard and the snail and the mole." Escargot, pretty good stuff, isn't it? "Those are unclean to you among all that creep. Whosoever doth touch them when they be dead shall be unclean until the evening." These animals are let down. How's Paul going to be able to eat? How can he follow this command to eat? He's going to have to kill them, isn't he? Well, that hits two areas. It was not wrong for the Israelites under the law of Moses to kill a clean animal to eat. That did not make them ceremonially unclean. But it was wrong for them to touch a dead body of an unclean animal. Think about that. Peter is going to be told, you eat of these animals. And in essence, he's being told, don't you discriminate among the animals in this sheet, both the clean and the unclean. The lesson to be learned is the cross had removed these barriers which previously had separated Gentile and Jew from each other. Remember, Gentile signifies anyone no matter what nationality, no matter what race he was, from a Jew. That being the case, you see, Jesus had already taught that this is going to happen. These restrictions, these dietary restrictions are going to be removed. Look at what Jesus said. There is nothing from without a man that entereth into him that can defile him. So, if I want to eat catfish that was condemned under the law of Moses, I can now eat a catfish. Pretty good stuff, right? And I can eat pork, which you couldn't do under the law of Moses. That's good old barbecue. Southern boys like that kind of food, don't we? Think about it. There's nothing from without a man, Jesus said, that can entering into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him. Oh, what comes out of us? He's talking about words. Those are they that defile them. It's talking about actions. They come out of us, don't they? Our mind tells our tongue what to say. Our mind tells my hand what to do, my feet where to go, and on we could go. If any man have ears to hear, let him hear. And when he was entered into the house from the people, his disciples asked him concerning the parable, and he said unto them, Are ye so without understanding? Notice this. Are you just like these Jews that I've been talking to, and you don't understand what I just told you? Do you not perceive that whatsoever thing from without entereth into the man, it cannot defile him, because it entereth not into his heart, but into his belly, and goeth out into the draught, purging all meats? Consider the Samaritan woman at the well in John chapter 4. This woman, the Jews, they worship in Jerusalem, and we worship on Mount Gerizim. This Samaritan woman was considered by the Jew to be so unclean that if you were a very, very strict Jew, you wouldn't even go through their land. But Jesus did. You'd go across the river, up the other side, the east bank. You'd go up the east bank, and you'd cross back over. You wouldn't even go through their land. You wouldn't talk to a Samaritan. Isn't that interesting? And much less, when you think about it, for the Jew, their totally wrong idea about women, I ain't talking to a woman in public. But Jesus talked to her, didn't he? And folks, here's something interesting about that. He told her what he did not tell the Pharisees and scribes and Sadducees. At this time, this period of time that he's been teaching, up to the Samaritan woman, he told her something that he never told the Pharisees during that entire time. I am he. Lord, we know Messiah comes. I am he. Isn't that interesting? Now, there's some reason behind it. I know I'm getting a little off where I wanted to, but I think it's fascinating. When you look at that when you look at that Samaritan woman, would the Jews have accepted any testimony from her? Not only because she was a Samaritan, but because she was a woman as well. They wouldn't have accepted any testimony that she could give. Why did Jesus tell her? Because of that reason. She couldn't testify as to who he was in a Jewish court, and they'd believe her. They didn't believe in him anyway, did they? And if you'll study up to that point of time, and if you reconcile what we call the four Gospels, if you reconcile them time-wise, he hinted a few times, but he didn't directly say, I am he. Why? He didn't want them to prematurely attack him, and they're going to start attacking him before too long. They were going to try and stone him, throw him off a cliff. I mean, it wasn't time yet. It didn't fit the time frame that God had set for him to be crucified. Look at verses 13 and 14. And there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, watch this, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." I've not done it, Lord. I have followed the dietary restrictions of the law of Moses to the letter. I have never allowed anything that is unclean or common to pass my lips. And yet, where was he staying? In the house of Simon the tanner. What would be going on in that house? Simon the tanner would be touching everything in that house. And the Jews, to touch a dead animal, what did the tanner have to do to tan the hides? He had to touch a dead animal. He had to skin that hide off of that animal in order to tan it. I believe Simon Peter was already starting to understand that the restrictions of the law of Moses are no longer. He was already moving in that direction. And yet when he was told to eat of all, whatever he wanted of these animals, no, not so, Lord. Nothing unclean, nothing common has passed my lips. Peter had never violated the dietary laws of the Jews. And the sheet apparently had clean and unclean critters in it, or he would not have said that. If it was only full of clean animals, he would never said, "Nothing unclean. I'm not going to eat of that. Nothing unclean has passed my lips." On one hand, old habits are hard to break, aren't they? I think about we as human beings. Because I did a lot of hunting and I really enjoyed hunting deer. I like to observe them. A lot of times I just let them pass by. Never took one, never harvested one. But I learned a lot about these deer. They're creatures of habit. They'll travel the basic same way they always travel. They wear down little trails. You can be assured that if they find a persimmon tree as it starts to ripen, after the first heavy frost, man, they're all about it. They're going to find that tree and they're going to eat. But we human beings are too, aren't we? Think about the way that you drove here tonight. There were probably at least a dozen different ways that you could have gone. Now, some of them would have been way out of your way, but what do? We get into a certain route, and even if somebody says, well, there's a shorter route to do this, what do? We tend to keep on going the same way. Old habits are hard to break. When we became Christians, depending on how we lived before the time that we became Christians, how many bad habits that were hard to break, how many associations that we had that we learned after a time, that's not really the people I need to be hanging around. We've got a situation in Jackson right now where some people there used to belong to a club. It wasn't anything wrong with the club, by the way. And they've recently realized they can't be a part of that group anymore because of the way they live. Old habits are hard to break, but on the other hand, there's no defense for him refusing to do what God said, is there? Don't we say that from time to time? If God said it, that's what I'm supposed to do. I may not understand why he says a particular thing, but if God said it, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm not going to be too hard on Peter because we all do it. This command was against everything that Peter had been taught from the time he was a baby. I would guess, and I'm guessing, that at this point in his life, he was probably around 40 or older. Remember, the Lord was on the earth for 30 years. I'd say he's probably more like 50. And he was a disciple of Jesus all that time. And then time has passed since that, since Jesus was crucified. This command was against everything that he had known up to the point of Jesus beginning to teach him. And yet, where was he dwelling at that very moment? In the house where dead bodies were common. And let's make sure we understand, the law of Moses didn't mean just a dead human body, it was a dead animal as well. You remember the high priest was not allowed to touch his father or mother if they died, because he had to be on call 24 hours a day at the temple. And if he had touched that dead body, he would be unclean until evening. Under Christianity, we don't have the dietary restrictions that they did under the old law, and I'm thankful because I can't have it anymore, but I love barbecue. In fact, when we go to Memphis, we go to a place that has the best barbecue anywhere around. It's good old Memphis barbecue. But be that as it may, it does not speak of recreational drugs. I want you to think about this. It speaks about critters. It doesn't speak about medicine that's been prescribed by a doctor, because we have a health problem and this medicine is the thing that's going to help us. So this doesn't speak about recreational drugs. I've heard several people try to make that distinction. No, it doesn't. Let's come back next week and look at verses 15 through 16. I see my time is up. Wonder when time's going to be up for all of us. You ever thought about that? Thanks for being with us, and hope that we've given you something to think about this evening, and hopefully we haven't given you anything that is not right.